So the first slide. Yeah, the one right after that. Yep. All right. So we're going to talk about personality traits, and specifically it's the big five personality traits. It's also called the personality factors, the big five. Now, the way it was developed, just quickly to mention, is it was atheoretical. They just said, let's put together all the questions from all the different questionnaires that people have used to study personality. We'll put them all together and we'll ask thousands of people throughout the world for their answers. And then they used a statistical technique called factor analysis that pulled out these five things explained everything. So that's why it's called the Big Five. Well, who cares about your personality besides your spouse and friends? If you understand yourself and others better, if you know what your personality type is, it can actually predict life outcomes, like what kind of a job you had, how financially successful you'll be, whether you're outgoing, have lots of friends or not. It can also predict your political values, whether you're going to be conservative or liberal. It molds relationships and it can break them. And it can be a guide to job choice if you're looking for a job. Next slide. One of the reasons why we have personality types is because it simplifies our view of the world. We look at the world through the lens of our personality, and it narrows down what we have to focus on and what matters to us. Next slide. So the first piece of personality is your temperament. As you can see from what's written up here, it's innate, biological, genetic. It's what we're born with, and it's relatively stable across situations. It's stable throughout life, though, and it's determined essentially by your genetics and your brain structure. So that's the foundation upon which your personality will fit. Next slide. Personality, then, is a complex pattern of your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that are characteristic of an individual. And it's formed through your temperament, which was genetic, biological, and your life experiences, including your environment, your culture, and your personal choices and experiences, is what modifies that temperament, or it utilizes that temperament to form your ultimate personality. Next slide. Now, you might recognize these persona masks. Actually, this originated way back when the Greeks and Romans had plays, mostly dramas, that they would do on a stage at quite a distance from the audience. So in order to tell who was the good guy, who's the bad guy, who's happy, who's sad, they would wear these masks because they were visible from way in the back. And the word persona is Latin that basically means mask. And that's the word that became personality. But we also refer to people's persona, which is the mask that we all wear when we're in different situations. So we're not the same when we're at home with our family than we are among strangers and so on. We wear a mask, and usually we want that mask to make us look better than we are. That is now a real art on the internet. People can modify their appearance and their voice, and they tell you how smart they are and how great athletes they are and everything, and you're looking at thinking, well, I'm nothing compared to that. Neither are they. But that's what they do. Next slide. So the question is your personality from nature, that is biological, or from nurture, your life experiences? And the answer, like almost every medical issue, is both. And it's about half genetic and half environment. Next slide. So your personality is stable, but how you act can change. So me talking to you like this in a public setting, when the number one phobia is public speaking, and here I'm doing that as an introvert, so you can change how you act. Next slide. So I said the big five personality traits, or factors, if you will. There are 5 of them, and I put the first letter in bold, and so as you go down, it's O-C-E-A-N, which spells ocean, so it makes it an easy way to remember what they are. So O is for openness, C for conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Now, that's a term that the psychologist chose to call that fifth factor. But some people don't like that word. They don't want to be thought to have any neurosis, although we all do. So they would refer to it as a negative emotion, which means sensitive to having negative emotions, such as fear and anger and such. So we're going to go through all 5 of these, and put together, they make up your personality. So next slide. I will tell you that the Big Five has been scientifically validated by large studies throughout the world, different personalities and so on. This is not true of most others, such as the Myers-Briggs, which is often used in the workplace. And the reason it's still being used, even though it's not scientifically validated, is it's been around forever, it's very inexpensive, and businesses can afford to give it to all their employees. But it's not scientifically verified in the way that Big Five is. So if you are a personality psychologist, all your money is on the Big Five, because it has so much evidence that proves that it really accounts for personality. Next slide. So the first one we'll talk about is openness. And really the way to think of that is open to new experiences. You like variety, that sort of thing. And it requires creativity in its fullness. So next slide. So there are different varieties of it. One is intellectual curiosity, which often correlates with your IQ. Creativity like painting, writing, what have you. And these people tend to prefer novelty and variety as opposed to the same old, same old. They want to go to a different restaurant every time they go out to eat. We don't want to go to the same place all the time. That's based upon partly their personality. Next slide. So that particular factor is divided into 2 sections. This is not as well known as the basic 5, but openness is divided into intellectual interests and openness proper, which would be the creativity part. So people who score high in openness and are leaning towards the intellectual interests tend to have high IQs. They're very interested in ideas. They are very good academically. They can do complex work that requires a high IQ. And they're very good at manipulating abstract concepts. And the most intelligent people can actually make abstractions about other abstract concepts. So it's a layered thing. So if you can do that, then you're very high in the intellectual interest component of openness. Now the other part of openness is openness proper, meaning you're creative, which creativity is high risk, high reward. So for example, being an artist is high risk if you want to make money from it. Very few people make a lot of money from paintings. Now, if you're Salvador Dali, you're going to make a lot of money. You'll have a museum named after you and all that. But most people who are painters make nothing or very little. So it's high risk, but there's also high rewards for creativity. These people seek new experiences. They enjoy aesthetics like art, music, beauty, and they like reading fiction. Now, the other group within openness, the intellectual interest one, they'll read fiction, but they're also strongly interested in nonfiction, learning more new things. Next slide. Now, major life success depends in part on the type of personality you have and what the world needs. And I will tell you that most things are a bell-shaped curve. It looks like a bell upside down. So there are very few people on the lower end, and then more and more people, go as the bell goes up, and then fewer and fewer until finally very few at the other end. So that's a good description, for example, of IQ. There are very few people who have an extremely low IQ, and very few people who have a dramatically high IQ, and most of us are somewhere in the middle. So that's a bell-shaped curve. But in terms of life success with the arts and creativity, it doesn't follow a bell-shaped curve. It follows a different type of curve called the log normal distribution, which I'll show you in the next slide, and there's no quiz on what that means. So there's a lot of success by relatively few people. So for example, on the internet, there was an opportunity for you to present your music that you developed yourself and maybe made a song with it and you sang it, and you could sell that to people who wanted it. And there were literally millions that came out, and maybe 100 of them sold something. So that's the high risk, high reward. Those 100 did really well. The rest, not so much. So good examples of that bell-shaped curve will be wealth, fame. The log normal curve would be wealth, fame, and major creations like new music, art, or scientific discoveries. So next slide. This will show you the graphs. So the blue graph that goes like this, that looks like a bell, that's the normal distribution that we're used to for things like IQ and people's height and what have you. The orange one behind it that goes up and then it rapidly tails off to the right. That's the curve that you see with success. So the Salvador Dali's are on the left side, they're way up there, and most of the rest of the artists are down, 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 until it's virtually nothing. So that's the curve that it follows. So it's not a normal distribution. So it's rough to be somebody who's high in openness and creativity is your thing if you want to make some money at it. It's a real challenge. Now, this is a similar concept to Price's Law, which I'll describe next. Excuse me. So Price's Law says that the square root of the number of people who do a task accounts for half of the productivity. So as an example, let's say you have a used car lot and you have 100 different salesmen there at different times. So how many of them sell the most cars? Well, you take a square root of the number of people trying to sell used cars. Square root of 100 is 10. So 10 of the salesmen account for half of all the sales, and the other 90 salesmen account for the other half. And that turns out, that law tends to apply to most productivity. The number of science papers that are produced. A small fraction produce the vast majority, and most of the rest produce one or two in a lifetime. It's also true for new music, fine art, useful new ideas, inventions, you name it. It follows this log normal curve. So a few people do really well and most people not so well. And under Price's Law, you would say only the square root of the number of people attempting something will account for half of it, and everybody else accounts for the other half. Next slide. So that's the reality of being very high scoring in openness. Now, people who do score very high in openness tend to be imaginative, curious, and seeking new experiences. Those at the other end, with a low score, tend to be practical, they prefer routine, and they're resistant to change. Now, it turns out in all 5 of these factors or traits, it's okay to be anywhere along the curve, because those all evolved to be of use to you. There's just different sets of uses and values and pluses and minuses. So next slide. Jobs that are great for people that are high in openness, especially in the case of scientists, researchers, inventors, that would be the intellectual one. And then artists, musicians, travel guides, CEOs, and college professors may also fit in the creativity side, but to be a good college professor or CEO, you need also to have high IQ. So next slide. So that's openness. And all of us fall somewhere on that curve in openness. None of us have no openness. And some of us have a lot, and some of us have a little, and most of us are in between. So the next one of the 5 would be conscientiousness. So here we see some rowers being conscientious and working hard. Next slide. So conscientious people tend to be industrious. They are orderly, self-disciplined, careful, and they strive to achieve. Next slide. So just like there are 2 major aspects to the openness, there are 2 for conscientiousness. And the first one is called industriousness. That means they're hardworking, diligent, they enjoy success, they're very goal-oriented. And the other one is orderliness. They are very organized, they follow the rules, they're efficient, they tend to have a schedule. There's a place for everything, and everything is in its place. That's kind of orderliness. Now, orderliness, to me, is very interesting because it is associated with the negative emotion called disgust. People who are high in orderliness tend to be very high in disgust. Next slide. So, this association between the disgust and motion. As an aside, there are 10 innate genetic biological emotions. Technically, they're called affects, but emotion works. 2 of them are positive. 1 of them is neutral, it's not positive or negative. And 6 of them are negative. We have a lot more negative emotions than positive. Why is that? Well, the purpose of emotions is to save our lives. And you're going to get into more trouble, you're going to die more readily if you don't focus on the negative things that can happen to you. That rustling in the bush could be a saber-toothed tiger who wants you for lunch. You cannot afford to miss that and deal with it. If you're not so happy one day, that's not great, but you're not going to die, right? So we have more negative emotions than positive. In terms of orderliness and the associated disgust, it's slightly more common in males than females. There's actually no big differences in personality types between male and female. They're all small. So next slide. So why is disgust involved with orderliness? Well, it's part of the behavioral immune system. We all know we have an immune system. Not everybody realizes that it affects behavior, and the purpose of that is to prevent infections. So triggers for disgust that may protect us from infections would be bodily fluids, waste, a bad odor or a taste. So if you're trying to eat something, you say, oh, this doesn't smell right, you throw it away instead of eating it and then dying from some infection. There are some animals that tend to do that, and snakes are very common in terms of triggering disgust. And that's probably because when we were very early in our existence as Homo sapiens, we lived either in or around trees, and snakes tended to live in trees then, and they could kill us. So we automatically have a disgust about snakes. Now, you can overcome your disgust just like I could overcome my introversion and talk to you. But what's built in and natural is to be suspicious of snakes. Likewise, insects, especially like cockroaches. Who likes them? By the way, if there's an atomic war and all humans die, cockroaches will still survive. They can handle radiation. Moral transgressions may also trigger disgust. Social deviation, like unconventional behavior or appearance. So for some people, when they see young adults who have piercings in their nose and their ears and their nipples, and they have purple hair in the middle and blue on the left, and yellow on the right, and so on, they may experience disgust because that, to them, that's so unconventional, it's not normative, and it can trigger that emotion. And so it helps to explain why some people are that way about others. And it turns out that people who are of a different race or different ethnicity tend to trigger disgust in people. Why is that? Well, years ago, when human beings lived in these groups of 50 to 150 people, mostly related in some way, if there was another group that came into their territory because they had run out of food or there had been a natural fire or something, well, they would bring with them diseases. And they didn't understand what's happening. All they knew was when these other people come, we die. So what's going on here? So you automatically feel some disgust. So that's what's actually built in and natural. Now, like everything else, our learning, our social evolution can change that so we can accept people from other races and ethnicities and such. But you can see a difference in our culture, for example, between people who are thrilled with having as many immigrants as possible and others who say, well, hold on here. We have to be careful who they are they going to fit in, are they going to try to change our culture, and so on. And so these are ways in which our personality can help drive us to whether we're conservative or liberal, for example. So these all have a significant effect on how we live our lives. So next slide. So politically conservative people tend to adhere to traditional social norms, orderliness, harsh punishments for moral transgressions, meritocracy, cautious about strangers, and sexual morality, not just for moral reasons, but because it lessens sexually transmitted infections if you're careful about that. So that's, again, part of our behavioral immune system protecting us. To be politically liberal, you tend to have less disgust, more social justice concerns, more open to diversity and social change. So we'd like to think that we are conservative or liberal because of our great intellect and understanding the differences and our levels of morality, and it turns out it's actually mostly your personality determines it. Next slide. So if you score high in conscientiousness, you can be very good in academics and work success. There's a battle between experts as whether high IQ or conscientiousness are more important for academic success. But if you're both intelligent and you work hard, you're likely to be very successful in something like academics. You tend to be dependable, resilient, you bounce back after adversity very quickly, efficient, and have more life satisfaction, actually, if you're positive in conscientiousness. On the other hand, there are some negatives to it. If you score very high in conscientiousness, you can be rigid, obsessive, and compulsive. You can be a perfectionist. And since no one can ever be perfect, you will always be, upset with yourself. You may be unable to delegate, which means you have to do all the work. Well, if I want it done right, I have to do it myself. Well, that's okay sometimes, but not if you're a boss. You're risk adverse, you don't want to take chances, more likely to get burnout, and you engage in less fun activities than people who don't score real high in conscientiousness. So there are pluses and negatives wherever you are on that curve. And so for a lot of people, they prefer to be somewhere in the middle, so they're not either super conscientious or not conscientious at all. Next slide. Now, what if you have a low score for conscientiousness? What's the advantage to that? Well, you tend to be more relaxed, engage in more fun activities, less burnout, and you can accept differences in people more readily, and you can accept social changes more readily. On the other hand, the negative part of being on that low side is you may be impulsive, not think things through. You can be careless, disorganized, poor work habits, and may have less life satisfaction. So there's advantages and disadvantages wherever you are on the curve. Next slide. So it's helpful to know where you are on these curves. It tells you more about yourself and others. So here's an example of the types of optimal jobs for people who score high in conscientiousness. Complex activities that require hard work and consistency, like being a physician, an engineer, a manager, a CEO of a business. And if you have lots of creativity, if you're very high in that, being an artist, an inventor, or a musician may be very good. And also if there are structured roles, like being an accountant or a lawyer, people that are high in conscientiousness can do well in those kinds of jobs. Next slide. Okay, so the third one is extroversion. Next slide. So extroverts tend to be social, outgoing, and when they engage with other people, they gain energy, whereas people like me lose energy. We need to go back and recharge our batteries before we can deal with lots of people again. They tend to be enthusiastic, they're more likely to be assertive, they get stimulated in the company of others, and frankly, they tend to be happier than people who are further down the extroversion list. By the way, I was thinking before this about my introversion and how nonetheless I can overcome that by being able to talk to you and others about things like this. And as I said, public speaking is probably the #1 phobia that people can have. So how do you overcome that? Well, there was a technique that I learned about, and that's to picture everybody in the audience as wearing a bunny costume with the floppy ears and the whole thing. Or you could watch your audience and imagine them in their underwear. Now, I won't tell you what I'm doing. No, I don't actually have to do that anymore. But so I have to say something funny for the pastor, right? Yes, yes. Okay. All right, next slide. So this is an example of the role of genetics, and it's just to give you an example, and this applies to extroversion. It's very genetic. So this is a study published in Cognitive Science in 2011, and what they did with the subjects is they put the EEG leads on their head so they could measure their brain waves, and there's one in particular called the P300 that increases with social stimuli. That's naturally what happens. So they show pictures to the people with these electrodes on and see what happened to their P300 waves. And what they found was that extroverts scored much higher than introverts. They had far more P300 waves, meaning they got a whole lot more pluses out of social contact, even just looking at a picture. So that's genetics. Next slide. So if you score high on extroversion, there are certain positives to that. You tend to be happier, more social success because you interact with lots of people, and you tend to like people. They tend to like you, although they tend to like you more than you like them, it turns out. It results in certain gains in terms of your job and that sort of thing. Very talkative. On the other hand, if you're very high in extroversion, you can become too flamboyant, and people may want to avoid you. You may talk too much. We know some people like that, don't we? You can become narcissistic, too fond of yourself. Impulsive, hedonic, meaning you're seeking pleasure all the time. And if they're alone, they can be very distressed, so they're very unhappy when they're alone. And sometimes you are alone. Next slide. If you're low in extroversion, if you're the other end, if you're an introvert, again, you tend to lose energy when you're with lots of people. So if I'm asked to go to a party with 50 people and I only know one of them, I'm going to lose a lot of energy. By the end of that evening, I got to go home and just recover. Whereas if I was an extrovert, I'd come back all excited and filled with energy. They enjoy time alone, and that can be an advantage because sometimes we have to be alone. They enjoy solo activities, for example, engaging in fantasy. I'm good at that. Gaming, I'm not good at that. Reading, I do a fair amount of that. They can be thoughtful because they have time to think things through. They can be a good listener. That helps me as a psychiatrist when I did that. And they're often shy. Now, shyness is also associated with neuroticism, a tendency towards negative emotion. So shyness can do both. I was painfully shy as a child. I couldn't even look at people. Now I can look at people, especially good-looking ones. Next slide. So what job opportunities for extroversion? So a good job choice for an extrovert would be sales. You can engage with a lot of people and talk and be excited and happy. Public relations is another good area for a high extrovert. Politics, you don't even have to be honest to do that job. Entertainment's another good one. Although a surprising number of actors and comedians are introverts, but they overcome that. Job performance is linked to better job performance if you're high in extroversion, especially if you're also conscientious and you're agreeable. So those are two of the other factors. So those three is a really good combination to be very successful in almost any job that you do. If you're extroverted, conscientious, and agreeable. In terms of relationships, it can be a challenge. So imagine that you're an extrovert and you marry an introvert. And now it comes to deciding, what are we going to do this weekend? Well, you know the extrovert's going to say, we got to go out. There's 2 parties I know about. We'll go to the first one, and the next day we'll go to the other one, and we're going to have a blast. And the introvert is saying, oh, no way. How do you deal with that? So that's an example of how understanding each other's personality types gets you to know where they're coming from, and unless you want to split up, you're going to need to find ways to compromise. So relationships can be a challenge if there's too much of a difference in personality styles, and that's perhaps especially true of the extroversion group. Next slide. So the next factor or trait is called agreeableness. That sounds good. Next slide. So people who are high in agreeableness tend to have very good interpersonal skills. They're very kind. They're empathic. which means they can read other people's emotions well. They tend to be very cooperative and polite. They tend to avoid conflict. That can be an issue because sometimes there is conflict that you can't avoid. And they tend to be low in assertiveness. That can be a problem. Next slide. We believe that agreeableness is part of a maternal instinct. And humans, both men and women, actually are very much more maternal compared to other animals. So men tend not to be as maternal as women, logically enough, but even male humans are more maternal towards their children than other male animals are, typically. They kind of ignore them or chew them up or whatever. So this is a human trait, and it's probably because human infants are extremely helpless and frequently upset and have constant needs that they cannot meet on their own. They will die without human attention. And so we have evolved as a species to care about our babies and children and to learn to recognize when they need help. So mothers frequently, because they typically, in the past at least, spent more time with their children than the fathers did, they could tell when the child is crying because they're hungry versus crying because they feel sick or crying because they've wet their diaper and it doesn't feel good anymore and so on. And that's a helpful skill for caring for infants. And mothers' hearing has evolved so that when a baby cries at midnight, the mother will hear it and immediately wake up. Meanwhile, dad is snoring, right? Men don't hear it. It's not that they ignore it, they simply don't hear it. On the other hand, if there's a certain banging noise or other things that could involve an invasion or something like that, the husband will wake up first. He has to protect his child. So different sounds reflect more male and female. So it's just part of the differences that can happen between men and women, and so the personality factor agreeableness is more prevalent among women in terms of scoring high on that one. And it's the greatest difference between men and women in terms of personality traits is this one, agreeableness. And actually, so the most disagreeable people are almost all men and they're in prison. So, I mean, seriously. So next slide. Yes, sir.
Agreeableness, how does that fit in with people pleasing, and then on a lower level beneath that, maybe independence, finding your sense of worth by being, getting that sort of attention?
Yeah, so like every other one of these factors, there's advantages and disadvantages to being high or low on it or somewhere in the middle. And one of the problems if you're very high in agreeableness is you can be taken advantage of and frequently are. This is thought to be one of the reasons why women make less money than men do for doing the same job, although that's now illegal. But it's okay if the reason the man makes more is he's been at the job for a lot longer or he works more hours per week or whatever. But if they're working the same amount, same productivity, same quality, they have to be paid the same, but you have to catch them in the act. But what happens is that highly agreeable people are adverse to conflict. And so they will less readily go to the boss and say, hey, I think I deserve a raise now. Look at what I've done. They advocate for themselves. Highly agreeable people won't do that. And so they don't get the raise. And so they end up making less money. So yeah, it's good to be great and kind and loving and empathic and all of that. But the downside is you're not going to take care of yourself as much. And what may happen from that is you may become bitter. So again, pluses and minuses to everywhere on the curve. I don't know if I really addressed exactly what you asked. But, well, let's look at the two elements of agreeableness. The first is compassion, being empathic, detecting the emotion in others, having good relationships, being cooperative, but you can be bitter because you're taken advantage of. The other one is politeness, adhering to interpersonal norms, shaking hands when you should, holding a door for someone when you should, supporting social harmony, but again, the negative side can be making less money due to low assertiveness. Next slide. So if you have a high score in this, agreeableness, you tend to like people and people like you. You tend to be more understanding. You're sensitive to danger, which is probably one of the evolutionary reasons why we have agreeableness. And it's more the case in women than in men. Why would that be? Well, imagine you have a 2-month-old baby that you're hanging on to. You're just 2 months out from delivering a child. And now you hear that rustle in the bushes that might be a saber-toothed tiger. You're going to be much more attuned to that because you're far more likely to die than if it's a man who, because they're larger, can run faster and so on, are in less danger. So women had to evolve to be more conscious of danger. If you have a low score in agreeableness, you'll be disagreeable. And I already said more men than women, especially at the extremes. They often don't like people if you're very low in agreeableness, and people don't like them. Tend to be competitive, critical, suspicious, and aggressive. And like I say, the most disagreeable people tend to be in prison. I wasn't kidding about that. That's a fact. Next slide. Good jobs for people high in agreeableness, like a nurse, a teacher, a minister, caretaker, human resources, a therapist or counselor, people like that. So again, if you know yourself, know more about your personality, it can make you think, well, this is the kind of job that would work for me. And of course, that only is relevant to people seeking jobs. I'm not looking for one now. Next slide. So the last trait or factor is the neuroticism. And again, I don't like using that word, but that is the term that the psychologists use, so we'll use it. These are people who are prone to being depressed, anxious, angry, having negative emotions. Next slide. So the emotions that these people have, if you score high in neuroticism, tend to be less stable. You're more likely to have it hear a trigger to become anxious or angry or whatever the emotion is. So it's a tendency to experience the negative emotions, and I've listed all but one of them: sad, anxious, angry, shame, and disgust. The other one is dis-smell, but although that is an emotion, it's not usually something that you have more or less of, depending if you're in the neuroticism group. That's just when you smell something that doesn't smell right, like burning rubber or some food that smells wrong. Again, that's a protective thing because it increases the risk that it's something harmful for you. So again, emotions exist to protect us, to keep us alive. Next slide. It's also divided into 2 subtypes. Withdrawal is the first one. So you tend to avoid uncertain things, people and situations. And the other is volatility. You tend to be more irritable, that is, easily angered. You get upset quite a bit when things go wrong. Next slide. So having high levels of agreeableness is not a weakness, but it's heightened sensitivity. You have more and rapid emotions that protect your life if you're very high in this neuroticism. So it has its advantages. You can quickly identify danger. That's one of its biggest advantages. But it does create more stress for you. You're likely to get triggered more readily. As boys and girls are growing up and you study this in them, there is no difference. But as soon as puberty hits, the difference starts and it becomes dramatic, far more in females than males. So we know that it's a hormonal thing. That's the reason why women tend to have more negative emotions than men do, and it's driven by the hormonal changes that they have versus the ones that males have. And again, it's a survival thing. It doesn't make as much sense in the modern era as it did back when our evolutionary processes began. Next slide. Good jobs for people who are higher in neuroticism would be childcare, being a waiter, secretary, teacher, therapist, middle management people. And it's because of their heightened awareness of problems, danger, and like if you're a therapist, you need to be very focused on what's going on with them, what risks do they have, and so on. Next slide. So now, what does your personality end up being? Well, if you have a personality test studying these big five, the 2 out of the 5 that you have the highest score on determines your natural inclinations and your strengths and weaknesses. So if you want to know what they are for you, you can take a free Big Five personality test. Next slide. So you can change your personality only in the sense that you can change how you act, even though your personality per se remains the same. And you can do that through deliberate behavioral change. So because I was an academic physician, I was told, thou shalt give lectures in front of medical students, residents, and practicing doctors, or quit. So I did, not quit. That was a deliberate behavioral change, and after doing it enough, it just became, okay, that's what you do. Life experiences can do it. And sometimes if you really need to change one, for example, you're very high in neuroticism and you're constantly irritable and sad and anxious, maybe having therapy would be necessary to really make a change in how that affects you. Learn you have more control over your emotions. Next slide. So if you want to have a free personality test, you can go to this site, http://www.outofservice.com/big5/. And it's been experimentally done. It's accurate. It doesn't take that long to do. I did it on myself just to be sure, and that it didn't take too long. And I'm not that complicated. No. So yeah, feel free to use that. There are several other free ones that are online, but this is one that has some pretty good science behind it. Next slide. So now's the time for questions and comments. Again, my rule about questions is you can ask anything you want as long as it's not difficult. You can say anything you want with comments. And then, Eric, would you put it back to the previous slide? So for people who wanted to copy down that site, they'll have a chance to do that, okay? So with that, I will be opening up to questions and comments, and Eric will give you a microphone. He's going to give you that.
Again, yes. Again.
Right?
All right. After listening to you, this is the second time you offer us during the time I've been here, a class like this. Thank you. This is quite interesting. I am a mess after learning all this. I am a mess. Okay. I went like this. Yes, this, not this. Yeah. In the middle. Now, left, right. I mean, this is like, that's why a test is going to be interesting to center it a little bit, right. Because I feel like, ooh.
So this was challenging for her, she says. She kept going zip, zip, oh, there, right. Well, that's because we all have some elements out of all 5 of these, and it's not going to be the same for each one. And you're going to picture yourself here with that one, and then you say, well, wait a minute, this one's more like, so yeah, doing the test will be very helpful. And if you feel scrambled from it, come talk to me about that. We'll unscramble it for you, okay?
I just want to let you know that I took the H test. That one came to me by surprise. Somebody asked me, send it to me, and I took it. What I discovered about me with that one, which represents humility and, hold on, that's it, I forgot. Humility and honesty.
Humility and honesty.
And in front of people that knew me so well, they were like, oh my Lord, you're that? Couldn't believe it, but I took the test without knowing what I was doing. That has to be quite honest, because they were all out of their mind. That has to be quite honest.
Yeah, okay, well.
It's fun. It's fun to take tests like this.
It is fun to know more about yourself. And sometimes you surprise yourself, and you said you surprise people who know you. You said, you're not humble, come on.
But you know, the more I know about myself, I realize that the mess that I created around me, the choices that I made, and it's like, whoa, I was happy when I didn't know more most, you know what I mean? But it really is interesting to see that we are not conscious at all living.
Yeah, we don't always know why we're doing what we're doing. If you know your personality very well, it'll often explain, oh yeah, that's why I did that, or didn't do that. So yeah. There's a saying that ignorance is bliss. My older brother used to say, well, if ignorance is bliss, you should be ecstatic. So that's what big brothers do. Okay, anybody else? Yep.
Back to what Kurt asked, can you describe how, for crying out loud, codependence fits in with any of these, maybe agreeableness, not as a personality trait, but as a...
So your question is about codependent people, and how does that relate to personality, I guess, really? Yeah, so it is true that the main one would be agreeableness. If you're very highly agreeable, you're more likely to try to do everything you can for the person in your life who's struggling with, say, alcohol or sexual abuse or whatever the thing is. That's one of the downsides of very high agreeableness. It can push you into doing things that are not good for you nor for them. That's why they have things like Al-Anon, so you can back out of that. But that's a common problem. People with a fairly high in neuroticism towards negative emotion also may be a bit more likely to do that as well. It's partly because they get triggered by that person and they want to avoid that. Hey, when you start drinking again and I become angry and anxious and all this, and I don't like feeling this way, so I'm going to fix you. Good luck with that, right? But yes. Anybody else?
No.
You're giving me-
I don't know if you can hear me or not.
I can hear you. While you're...
I'm wondering, with the Myers-Briggs, which has been a while now, how does that kind of fit into all this, the ISTJ sort of thing?
Yeah. So the Myers-Briggs, I might have mentioned it before you got in, but the Myers-Briggs has been around forever. It's very inexpensive to buy, and so businesses buy it up all the time and use it for their employees, and they think it's somewhat helpful, and I think it is, but it's just not well scientifically proven. It's based a lot on theory, particularly Carl Jung's theories. He was very interested in personality, among other things. So it doesn't have the same gravitas scientific background as the Big Five has. So if you really want to know your personality, you want to do the Big Five. But businesses are so accustomed to using the Myers-Briggs, and it's so inexpensive compared to other tests, that's what they use. I'm not saying it's not valuable at all, but it's just not as scientifically proven. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
So does personality make up behavior, or does behavior make up personality?
He always asks good questions. You're not allowed to ask hard ones like that, but okay. So the question is, does your behavior determine your personality? Does your personality determine your behavior? It's far more the latter. Your personality determines what you do, more so than what you do makes your personality. Remember, your personality is a combination of half genetics. You can't change that by your behavior. And it's by your life experiences, mostly when you're very young. So that's why personality is very difficult to truly change, if at all. What you can change, though, is the behaviors that you do. It doesn't change your personality, but it enables you, if you pick the right behaviors, to have more adaptive kinds of behaviors. And you can also alter your thoughts and your feelings as a result, too. But your personality is still the same. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. There's a lot of, I love these studies, that's why I'm here. A lot of different, and I was thinking about the questions or the survey or the testing. I know I've done Briggs, I've done the DISC, some other ones. It's interesting though, they all seem to kind of carry similar things, traits, I guess. So,
Yeah.
like these were jokingly saying, I'm an extrovert. I don't think that I am, but I love people. But I think about, especially the one I did years ago, it was a DISC in the year 2000. It was a book called Understanding How Others misunderstand you. And the whole foundation of it is Christ, our Lord, was able to function in all the good things. It was really, really good. And they used the disc profile. And I wondered, because David and I had been married, we'd been married a while. And the disc, in that particular task, it's DISC. I is influential and inspirational. That's the name. Then you have stability, compliance, and direct. It's kind of not right, but that's kind of what it is. And David and I took that test, and I was high I, S, and C. So I would think, the agreeableness was in there and all that. I had no D in me. It didn't even register being direct. David was high I, but his D was right next to his I. So in our marriage all these years, I wondered, why are you so mean? But the D would kick in when he'd get stressed. So I'm curious about this test, and I plan on taking it, but thank you.
Sure. So all of those features, they're not named the same in the Big Five, but they're all included in it. So, if you're fairly low in agreeableness, you're going to be much more direct. Men tend to be more direct than women, by the way. So when a man wants to correct another man, he'll just say, hey, you did that wrong. And this woman will say, well, I just want to tell you something that might be of some benefit to you, and, much more gentle and nice. Now, these are generalities. And actually, even in agreeableness, where there's the greatest difference between men and women, there's more difference between women and other women than there is between women and men. And the same thing for men. Men are more alike than they are different. So the differences in personality are actually rather small, except at the greatest extremes, like particularly disagreeableness. If you were going to look at a random 100 people and you say, I want to pick one at random and that I'm going to guess if they're disagreeable, it's going to be a man 60% of the time, but not 50 or 100%. On the other hand, if you said I took 100 people and I want the 10 most disagreeable, 9 of them will be men. So men tend to cluster more towards the bottom of agreeableness, women more towards the front. But that's differences on averages between men and women, not between an individual man and an individual woman. There are plenty of disagreeable women, I'm sure you've met them. And there are plenty of agreeable men, you may or may not have met them. But yeah. So the personality psychologists are pretty uniform in their agreement that if you want to understand personality, this is the way you do it. All those other tests, they give you hints and they have some reality to it, but they don't have the same in-depth study. This was developed by thousands of people throughout the world, all different kinds of cultures, and they showed commonality throughout the world. And they're very convinced, this is very accurate. So that's why I wanted to present this one. Yeah, Enneagrams.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh,
I guess people know what you're asking you. Yeah. Yeah, so again, that's the sort of thing, that's sort of pop culture thing that people like. It's just not as scientifically validated as you would want. If you want to know, according to the best science we have, what your personality is, go to a site like that for free, you'll find out. It's accurate. They do often encourage you, by the way, to do it for your partner and or have them do it and then start to compare them, because you can see how differences in personality types can cause clashes on the one hand, or they can cause you to feel closer together, depending on how well they mesh. And they don't have to mesh completely, but you have to understand what the differences are and learn to compromise based upon that. Okay, we'll go to the big party this Saturday, but then the next weekend we're going to stay home and watch this movie that we wanted to watch. Okay, so that's the compromise. Now, not everybody's willing to compromise, and that doesn't work so well. But, okay, well, thank you all. I appreciate your time.